Hey guys, so make sure that you do these practice problems before you do the lab. This will make it so much easier. Hopefully you haven't started doing the lab and flipping out like, what is this all about? So there is a little bit of a video though, a preview of solubility, taking water and salt. And you know that if you put salt in water, it will dissolve. The sodium dissociates from the chlorine, and that you now have salty water, but you don't see the salt, it has dissolved. And that's what we're talking about when we talk about solubility rules. Now, if something's insoluble, you will still see it in that water, and it might even fall to the bottom of the container that the water's in. So here are the solubility rules that go with the practice problems. Make sure you watch one of the videos that was recommended on solubility rules. Sometimes you might even want to watch one or two of them. So, solubility rules. There are certain compounds and elements that will always make a compound soluble, be able to dissolve in water. So, on the left column, notice nitrates, acetates, C2H3O2. Any element from group 1 is always soluble. Sulfates are always soluble. Ammonium, not ammonia, ammonium is always soluble. And any element from group 7 or 7A and group 17, excuse me. And then exceptions are if you have lead attached to a nitrate, then that nitrate would not be soluble. If mercury is attached to a sulfate, then it's not soluble. So you go through this PMS. That's how a mnemonic device to remember the solubility rules. So you've got lead, mercury, and silver. If any of those are attached to something on the left column, it makes it insoluble. Okay. Group 2 of the periodic table, like magnesium, not soluble. Castrobear, little whistle there. Castrobear, calcium, strontium, barium, those are not soluble and they make compounds not soluble. PMS, the lead, mercury, and silver, if you look at the very bottom, is never soluble with sulfates and group 17. And then Castrobear, never soluble with the sulfates. That's calcium, strontium, and barium. So we move from the solubility rules to the worksheet. And the worksheet is called Solubility Practice Problems. There's definitions for soluble and insoluble. You'll want to make sure you go over those, aqueous and solid. So if something's a solid, it may be what precipitates out and falls out in the reaction between two chemicals. Anything aqueous, it is separated, the ions have dissociated, and it is soluble. So if your directions there, you use the solubility rules. Here's some examples of how to solve these problems. First of all, with potassium phosphate, you do have to name every one of these chemicals so that you practice using your rules of naming different chemicals. Then you want to find out, is it soluble in water or isn't it? So what you do is you use your solubility rules. If you look at the periodic table, potassium is in group 1. So here's the periodic table. And if we look back at our problem, we have potassium phosphate, and we want to find potassium on the periodic table. I bring it back up. Potassium is in group 1. It's on the far left. It's 1, 2, 3, 4. It's in period 4. And so potassium is in group 1 and is soluble. Phosphate, we would have to look at our solubility rules. We don't see phosphate mentioned, but we do know on the left side for under NAG for group 1, any element in group 1 that appears within that combination is soluble. So potassium phosphate is soluble because potassium is in group 1, and so it's always soluble. Then all you have to do is Google, where do you find potassium sulfate? If you look up magnesium hydroxide, and first we look at the periodic table and look to see where magnesium is. Notice it's in group 2, okay, group 2. If we then go back to our solubility problems, here's magnesium, it's in group 2. And if we look at our solubility rules, magnesium, group 2, is not always soluble. So very likely it is insoluble, and hydroxide is not mentioned on the solubility rules either. Hydroxide is insoluble. Certain group 2 exceptions would be calcium, strontium, and barium. These are magnesium is not those, and therefore it is insoluble. So you just use your solubility rules, the periodic table, look at that compound. What group is the metal in? Or is it a non-metal, and is it in group 7? Use those rules to figure out whether they are insoluble or soluble.